Seeing what's growing in place, our place in the southern Appalachian Mountains, keeps visitors returning time and time again to the North Carolina Arboretum. They are particularly drawn to marvel at the miniature trees and landscapes on display from May through November each year in the Bonsai Exhibition Garden. The small scale of bonsai is certainly key to the attention they attract, but at the Arboretum, there is another less obvious element of interest, and it's hiding in plain sight. Join us for this installment of American Bonsai at the North Carolina Arboretum, a series of programs with our curator Arthur Jura, highlighting exactly what makes our bonsai collection unique from any other public display to be found, in more than meets the eye.
We're circling back around. In the first installment, gave kind of an overview, and I listed 5 things, 5 ways that bonsai at the North Carolina Arboretum was different than what you would find at any other public garden collection. And the final piece of that, the 5th item that differentiates us, is our focus on a naturalistic expression and tying bonsai to the experience of being in Western North Carolina in the Southern Appalachian Mountains. And this program is going back to that, to give it more attention, to focus on it a little bit longer. Let's begin by identifying what naturalism is. And naturalism, it has different meanings depending what it's applied to. You know, there's naturalistic philosophy, naturalistic politics, naturalistic religion. We're talking about naturalism as it applies to art, particularly visual art, right? And so you can see the definition right there. What it boils down to is representing things as they appear to be, right? And we're dealing with nature as it happens. So in this case, naturalism refers to depicting nature as it is. And we're gonna jump out of the bonsai mode for just a moment and go to painting instead, all right? Because I have always been a student of art and painting particularly. And it illustrates something for us, no pun intended, right? We're gonna look at the Eastern and Western points of view here. All right, so here is an old image, right? 13th century, that's the 1200s. We're going way back, right? Nearly 1,000 years. And this is in China. And you know, here in the West, our focus on antiquity is always Greece and Rome, but the Chinese, the Middle Kingdom, as it was referred to, was a highly advanced civilization, the equal of Greece or Rome, but not given the same degree of credit by many history books, which happen to be made in the West. Funny how that works. But the Chinese were way, way ahead of everybody at this point, at least in terms of painting, but in a lot of other cultural regards. Right? So 13th century Chinese. What were we up to in the West? This is a 13th century French image. This is from a codex, which is an illustrated book, kind of the ancient forerunner of graphic novels, right? And in the West, religion dominated life. And so this text was a religious text. It's illustrating some, I believe, scene from the Bible, but I could not tell you what. I don't know what. And my interest in it isn't what it refers to, but rather the way that things are depicted. And so when you look at the women in this image, they're almost like copies of each other. with slight modifications, right? The hands are a little bit different from one to the next, but the faces were almost identical. The hair, the pose, the uh, body language, all the same. You'll notice they don't seem to be in good contact with the ground. They're kind of floating in air. But we're not here to study people, we're here to study plants. And I mention about the people because the plants are the same way. Those are what kind of plants? Who can say? They're plants, I can tell that, but I can't tell much else about them. They are highly stylized. The human beings are highly stylized, the plants are highly stylized. I don't know if those are rocks that the plants are growing on or what, but this was the state of art in the West back in the 1200s. So we move up a bit, 15th century. And in China, again, look how refined this is, how expressive it is. And, it's a beautiful work of art. I have no idea what it says up there in the left-hand corner. Focusing solely on the image and on looking at those trees in particular. Right? Very evocative. They have personality, and the composition is interesting to me. There are two trees leaning one way and two trees leaning the other way. It's very appealing. I like this image a lot. 15th century Chinese. Oh, here we are back in the West. It's unfortunate, but we're still kind of lagging behind. Religion is still the central element in life, and this scene depicts the minting of a couple of new martyrs. They're being tortured to death. Okay, not very pleasant. The people are done better, right? Big advancement in how people are represented. The tree is better too, but it's a very stylized tree still. All the trees in here are very stylized, and they still, you look at the trees in the background, they still have the effect like it's a stamp. They're just being stamped out. Interesting too that the tree in the center, to which the four martyrs are tied, is shaped to fit the dimensions of the canvas. Right? So the tree goes up straight, right, smack in the middle, and then it kind of stops abruptly and you get up to the uppermost limits of the picture space. But it didn't matter because the tree was only there so you could tie the martyrs. That's all the tree was doing. But still, the artist had to represent a tree, and that's how he did it, certainly recognizable as a tree. Here's a Japanese image, 16th century. You'll notice it looks quite a bit like the previous images that we saw from China. And that's no accident. Most of Japanese culture, at least in the beginning, was derivative of China. China was the big dog, and Japan followed China's lead and absorbed China's influence, and in many cases, learned at the feet of the Chinese, including in things like painting. And so here we have a cliffside and a lake down below, some boats, some trees hanging off the cliff. It's true to life. You have the trees at the top of the cliff are standing upright. The ones that are growing on the side of the cliff, they're in a disadvantaged position. They're leaning out, clinging to the side of the mountain. This is still very stylized, but it has a believable aspect to it, a natural kind of feeling to it. Well, things have changed in the West. 17th century Dutch painting, and here religion nowhere in sight, even though religion was still a central element in life, but art had been freed up. Other things could be represented. So here we have a scene, just a basic winter scene, right, with the church in the distance. Religion still matters, and the town clustered around it. But I'm most interested in these trees. These trees are are getting better, right? These definitely look more like trees, like somebody paid attention to how trees were shaped when they painted this picture. There's still a convention at work, you know. If you look at that light colored tree right smack in the middle of the image there, you'll notice that there are no branches that come right toward you, because that kind of perspective gets tricky, you know. This is like presenting a tree where one side has been sliced, all the branches have been sliced off. So you can look in and see the trunk and see all the other branches, minus the ones that would be facing you. That's just a convention. Having drawn trees, I can really understand why they did that. It simplifies things a lot. Japan in the 19th century, so the 1800s, right? And you look at this, and to my eye anyway, there hasn't been a lot of advancement. There hasn't been a lot of advancement. Things are represented more or less the same way. In fact, they're getting more stylized, right? When you see the way things are depicted, particularly those trees, which I take to be pine trees, you see them up on top of the two mountain areas. Again, they have that look like they were stamped on, right? Each one is pretty much like the other. There are little variations, but they're very similar. And then you have water and you have buildings. And in each case, it's kind of like what you're looking at is not so much a realistic depiction as it is a symbol. So here's a symbol for water, right? Water coming down a mountain, waterfall. Here's a symbol for a dwelling, a house of some kind. Here's a symbol for a pine tree. You know, and down in the lower right-hand corner, the symbol for a flowering tree of some kind, cherry most likely. Very symbolized, very stylized. This is a painting on a screen, right? A folding screen. And so it was a decorative and functional item that you would find in a wealthy person's house. 19th century. Oh, art in the West has gone in a completely different direction, right? So things now are very realistic in that things are depicted in a way that we would now identify as being like a photograph, right? Photorealism. And remember, the camera first was invented in the mid to latter part of the 19th century. And artists learned from the camera in terms of perspective, single point perspective, and how to give an idea of depth in an image. And look at the depth that you have in here, the lighting. You know, I would call your attention to one other item here. Here in the Eastern art, and it was true in the previous ones, although I didn't point it out, you'll notice there's a lot of empty space. Things are kind of floating in space. Stuff is left out. That's done with much intent. In the West, nothing's left out, right? The trees are done in detail, the grass is done in detail, the water, the sky, the mountains in the distance, the deer in the foreground, everything is there, everything. Not a lot left to your imagination. Very descriptive. Well, for a while it was. This is in the same general time period. And something dramatic happened in Western art. And the guy who painted this picture, Paul Cézanne, he was one of the main motivators of that change. He painted in a completely different way. And initially, his work was scoffed at. He was thought of as being not talented. He was extremely talented. He was also way ahead of his time. And he dragged the rest of the art world with him as time went by. And so here we have a depiction of a tree, and it's very naturalistic. That is a closely observed and accurately rendered tree. I'll tell you something, in bonsai circles, that would be considered a bad tree. It's a bad tree because, see, it's got a swelling about midway up the trunk. That's called reverse taper, and it's bad. And it happened because of all those branches coming out of the same point on the tree. That's bad too in bonsai. Nature doesn't give a flip about any of that stuff, and human beings are left to make of it what they will. And Paul Cézanne sat in front of this tree, and he did paint from life. He took his easel out into the countryside, sat up in front of his subject, and painted what he saw. And so he represented that tree accurately. Whether you think that tree is attractive or ugly, and indeed whether you think Cézanne's painting is attractive or ugly, is strictly a matter of taste. There is no right and wrong. There's no right and wrong way for a tree to be put together. There's no right or wrong way to paint a picture, except in the critical mind of human beings. We are, in essence, judgment machines, and there isn't much we can look at without passing judgment. So just to give a rundown of the images that we looked at and breaking them into two camps, right? In my view, this is my opinion. In the upper section of the screen, above the red line, you have the more stylized images. And some of them are Western and some of them are Eastern. And the same is true with the more naturalistic images. Some of them are Western and some are Eastern. It's not like one culture had a lock on naturalism. That's not true. But it was a way of looking at things. And it exists all over the world, and it was represented in art all over the world. Here is a bonsai, right? And this is from the Arboretum collection. I'll tell you, when I look at this tree, I am filled with dissatisfaction. I've been growing this tree since 1993, okay? It looks this way because I made it look this way. I really don't like it anymore. There was a time I would have thought, look what I did, pretty good, huh? But no more. I don't like this tree much anymore. It will change. It hasn't changed yet. It still looks like this. This is why it looks like that. This is a bonsai book. This is actually a very well-known bonsai book by a man named John Naka, who was very influential on Western bonsai art. And this was his illustrations for a certain style of bonsai. It's called the Yogi style, okay? And he outlines how to go about this and defines the different aspects of it that make it what it is. The English translation of Yogi is informal upright. And so, like most bonsai people, I learned by poring over books like this and studying the representations that were given to me, the examples, right? And this is a very respected book. So there you see how you're supposed to do it. When we got the tree, it looked like this. This is 1993. And it was in pretty rough shape, as was the entire collection that we received back then and started with. Overgrown, not in very good health, badly potted, underpotted, so not in great shape. And as it is now, minus leaves, right? Every now and again, we go and defoliate these spicates because it makes it easier to work on them, for one thing, but also when they regrow their leaves, the new leaves are generally smaller, which is desirable in bonsai. So we go ahead and strip this every so often. And it gives you a good look at how this tree is put together. So that's a pretty good transition, right? There you see them side by side. And the point I would want to make here, it should be pretty evident how similar these two are. And mind you, there was no conscious effort to imitate this particular drawing. But all the informal upright drawings that you'll see in the bonsai book, they kind of look just like that. So look what it does, right? It goes out, it cuts back, it goes back, right? Not as pronounced as this is, but it's doing the exact same thing, back and forth. We have a first branch over here on the left side, same here. We have a back branch, mine's a little bit higher, but it's back there. And we have a first branch on the other side, it's right there, right? We have asymmetrical triangle. This one's pretty symmetrical, looking at it like this, but it's definitely a triangle, kind of pointy, less pointy, but still very pointy. So this, you would have to say, is a reasonable representation of a bonsai tree. So if your idea is to make a bonsai tree, this is not a bad thing. Here's a cultural artifact. We can tell when we look at it, it doesn't belong to our culture. It comes from another culture, an exotic culture. We recognize the foreignness of it. Here's another one. This is a genuine, very prestigious Japanese bonsai in Japan. And it's beautiful and very valuable from an aesthetic sense as well as from a monetary sense. So in no way am I denigrating it, but it too is a cultural artifact. When you look at it, it evokes the idea of something exotic, something foreign, something not of our culture. The good news is other concepts are out there. You don't have to do bonsai that way. This is a famous piece. This is in the National Collection in Washington, D.C. But there's another one very similar to it that's in the collection of the Pacific Bonsai Museum out in Washington State. And it was done by a fellow named Vaughn Banton, who was a Louisiana bonsai practitioner back in the 70s, bonsai artist back in the 70s. And he was a pioneer in American bonsai, and he did something quite noteworthy. He loved Asian things, okay? He was thoroughly immersed in that and really loved it, but he also loved where he was and enjoyed the nature of the Deep South and spent a lot of time observing it. And he was a pioneer in multiple ways, including using native plant material for bonsai use. And this was one of the native plants that he used, bald cypress. But because he was out there in nature and had his eyes open and was paying attention, he noticed that bald cypress grew in a way that was completely unlike any of the forms that were offered in bonsai instructional manuals, books, magazines, or learning from teachers. None of them made bonsai that looked like bald cypress trees that he could see growing where he lived. And he went ahead and made one. And this was completely original and unique at the time, to go out and study a tree in nature and build it as a bonsai. And because he was an American, and because he was working with an American species, and because he was looking at a natural example in America, there's really not much choice but to refer to this as American bonsai. And this was one of its earliest achievements, Vaughn Banton. Died prematurely, sorry to say. So, naturalism. First rule of naturalism. observe and study nature. You can't do naturalism in bonsai, right? You can't make a naturalistic representation of a tree unless you know something about trees. And you can read all the books you want. I mean, not to be bonsai books, you can read tree books instead. You look at tree pictures all day. But you don't know trees until you experience them. And the way you experience them is in person. Observe and study nature. When I click this button, the program will launch into auto progression, right? The pictures are going to change themselves in 5-second intervals. And the reason I did that is because there's a lot of pictures of trees, right? And if I were to go through by hand, advancing manually, it would take 3 times the amount of time we have just to get through these pictures, because I would want to tell you about each one, right? Because every one of them, right? Some of these pictures go back 20 years. I still remember taking them. I know what the tree is and everything else. And we don't have time for that. So let's go and we'll look at trees, pictures of trees, and I'll tell you something about them. All right, so there's a tree. If you come to the Arboretum, you pass that tree. It's right on 191. This is our perspective usually on trees, looking up. Look at how long those branches stand. They are things of beauty. Very often, what I get is silhouette, but always in photographing trees, I want to try to capture something of feeling that I get in seeing them. And part of that has to do with things that don't relate directly to the tree, like setting, lighting. But a lot of it comes down to the tree itself. These were not just any trees. As I was walking around with my camera and looking for things to photograph, only certain trees call out to me and say, "Cool, over here, you like good-looking trees? I'm one." Why is it that certain trees speak to us? Well, sometimes they're huge, like that. That's a big tree. And sometimes they have really interesting shapes, like that pine or this yellow birch or bald cypress. It's the shape, it's the form. Some of these trees, feature flowers and bark, but mostly what I wanted to show in these images is form. It's something in the shape of them that is appealing. And it's something, in my estimation anyway, something in the shape of them has meaning. They attract my attention. They are each unique. Trees are fundamentally the same all over the world in that they have certain basic things. Trunks, branches, twigs. Almost all trees have all those things. But each and every one of them is different. Of course, if you're not really into trees, they all look the same. But that's true of anything, right? If you don't really care about it, if you don't spend much time paying attention to it, then it all kind of looks the same. But these trees are not the same. There are certain themes that run through them. But each one is unique. And there's very definite reasons for that. My study of trees began when I was young, very young. I've always been attracted to them. But when I was very young, it was strictly a visual thing and an emotional thing. And it really wasn't until I got to the Arboretum 31 years ago that I started learning something about the biology of trees, the science of trees. And I have a great debt of gratitude to Ron Lance, who was my supervisor when I first got here. And he was a walking encyclopedia of knowledge about biology and horticulture. He was amazing. I learned so much from him. And it filled in blanks for me, right? Trees were always visually appealing and always provoked feeling in me. But with the scientific understanding, and mine is limited, I wouldn't make any pretense to ever coming up to Ron's level, but I've learned a few things, and they helped me appreciate why the visual element was so appealing and what those emotions are tied to. Most of these images taken in North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, Tennessee, although I stray afield a little bit, up into the Northeast, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, down to the deep South, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. But mostly I'm based here in Western North Carolina. And most of these images are from here. And that's not an insignificant thing. I'll explain why by and by. But many of these trees, like this one, and these, are things that are all around us. That one isn't, that's up in DC, famous cherry trees. But most of these images are from around these parts. They are Southern Appalachian trees. And I spent a lot of time looking at them, studying, trying to understand them. I see a tree that calls to me and I say, what? What is it about that makes it special? And what I started doing, I can't say exactly when, I guess it kind of snuck in over time. But when I started out in bonsai, I was doing bonsai like those pictures in the books, just like I was telling you. But over time, I started being influenced by all those trees I was looking at and moving away from trees as they were interpreted for me in how-to books and more toward my own understanding of what makes them appealing and how they're built. Here's a pertinent question for the topic at hand. How do the most interestingly shaped trees in nature get that way? This is not one of the more interesting trees in nature, right? This is a very young white pine. It's a nice tree, there's nothing wrong with it. There are lots and lots of them out there. But visually, and not unrelatedly, it doesn't have the emotional appeal either. But visually, it's not that interesting. Why? Because it's straight. It's just a straight line with other straight lines coming out of it. Why is that? It's because it's young. It's a young thing. It's full of energy. You could say it's full of promise, but that's reading into it. We don't know. Maybe, a week after I took this picture of deer came along and chewed this thing to pieces. We don't know. But at this point, it's young, strong, unblemished, and has virtually no character. Think of the difference between a baby, an infant, and an old person. The baby is lovable, right? And we look at the baby and we think it's full of promise, even though we don't know. Next week a deer could come along and mess it up too. We don't know. But we look at that baby and it tugs at our heartstrings, but they're not that visually interesting. They're more interesting for other reasons, But when you look at an old person, And you see the lines in their face, you see the bend of their back, you see the sagging of their flesh, graying of their hair. It's all interesting. It might not all be appealing, but it's all interesting. Wow, this is interesting, right? You know what? When this tree started out, when it was 5 years old, 10 years old, it was probably perfectly straight. No more, and never again. Same with this. How did that happen? Look at the young maple. That's the maple. That's an oak, I guess. It's a young oak next to it. And look how straight it is. There you have a little, I didn't even realize that before, but you have a little vignette there. You have the ancient one next to the young one, because I believe they're both red oaks. Okay, what happened? What happened? Oh my goodness. This is a dawn redwood. I mean, this looks macabre to me. This is the kind of thing you might come across in a nightmare. I don't know what causes this either, except I've seen it on other dawn redwoods. In fact, if you look in the background on this picture on the left-hand side, there's one that's starting to get the same effect. I have to find out about that. I don't know what causes that. It's bizarre looking. This interest, visual interest. You could say it's grotesque, but the grotesque is often very interesting to us. Bald cypress down in Louisiana. This is right up near Mount Pisgah. And this one near Craggy. So the answer to that question, the straightforward answer, how do the most visually interesting trees get that way? They get that way through the trials of adversity. They get that way because life is difficult. The difficulty can come in different forms, right? And some of them are conditions of the sight. And there you see them listed. I don't need to read that to you. You can read. These are things that come with the environment that the tree grows in. Right? They are there prior to the tree arriving, and the tree has to deal with it. Here's a tree that's dealing with it. This is a Virginia pine up on a rock, top of a mountain, exposed rock. This is at State Park, Stone Mountain State Park in North Carolina. And that tree is faced a lot of adversity, right? And it has a lot of those challenging conditions of sight elements with which to deal. One, look where it's grown. It's grown in a crack in a rock. It doesn't have access to earth. It's growing on accumulated organic matter that built up in those crevices over eons of time. Very finite amount of medium for it to grow in. Furthermore, it's fully exposed, right? The sun, the wind, the snow, the ice, it's got no shelter whatsoever sitting out there on that rock. And you can see the effects. This is an old tree, lots of dead parts. And this part up at the top is in the act of dying now. This is still very healthy, right? And this is one of the amazing things about trees and woody plants is that they can compartmentalize damage, even to the point where they can have dead parts on a living tree. That's very interesting, visual interest, but also biological interest. It's a trait that I'm very glad humans don't share. These are Table Mountain pines. Actually, I should say this is a Table Mountain pine. It's got all those trunks, but that's a single tree. And it's because every time it tries to grow, it gets broken down. This is another one growing up on a high elevation mountaintop. And life is just too hard up there. You can't build a trunk, not of any size, not of any height. Get tall, the wind just comes along and knocks you down. And so it grows more like a shrub. And that's a consequence of the conditions of the site that it's growing in. These are red oaks growing at Mount Jefferson State Park. These trees, according to what I read, these trees are hundreds of years old. These trees were never logged. They're only about 30 feet tall. There isn't enough wood in them, to make them worth cutting down. Plus, you have to go way up on top of a mountain to get it. There was easier lumber to be had down in lower elevations. Plus, it was better, it was straighter and all. So these trees were just left. And there they still are. And you look at them and you read them by the shapes, and you know that they've had a hard life. As have these oaks. These are up at Craggy, right in that big field that's by the shelter up there. These are really neat trees, and these are old too, and they're not even as big as 30 feet. These trees, I would guess to be, in the 20 to 25 foot tall range, but they're old. These aren't youngsters. You look at them and, their age is in their bark characteristics for one thing, but it's also in their shape. Young trees don't look like that. You go out to the coast, you can see this. This is at Fort Fisher, and these are hollies growing at Fort Fisher. Yukon hollies, I believe, but you look especially at those in the background and you see they look like they've been sheared. And in effect, they have been, but they've been sheared by the wind. These trees are growing in sand, and they're right next to the ocean, and the wind is constantly raking them and, breaking parts off and in effect pruning them, shearing them. Tough sight. Back to the mountains. This is the effect of wind here in the mountains. You see how that top is all kind of leaning in one direction to the left there? That's the effect of the prevailing wind. How come the trunk is straight? Well, up to a certain height, the tree is protected from the wind by the other trees. They can grow their trunk straight, but when the crown gets up to the top and there's no protection, then the wind shakes. Go to the swamps, famous bald cypress trees and their knees. That's because of growing in the water. They don't do that unless they're growing in the water or in a very hydric situation. You grow bald cypress like in your yard, or we have them growing here at the Arboretum that we planted. They don't grow knees. We have one bald cypress growing knees, and it's growing in a really wet area, a sea. So they are produced by the conditions of the site. I love this tree. This is in Virginia, Maymount Park. It's massive. It's a tulip tree. I don't know how old it is. I don't really care how old it is. I know it's old. But look at how many times that tree has been beat up. Look at the whole top got ripped out of it at some point, right? This is how the tree used to go up the middle here. Gone, big cavity there. See all these limbs truncated? They used to extend out. Gone, new parts taking over, right? Here's another view looking up. You see something like this, right? Which is a branch. But if that were in the ground, right at that point, if that was emerging from the ground at that point, that would be a fairly tall tree. That would be a 40 40-foot tall tree. But it's just part of this tree. Give you a sense of how big it is. That's me standing next to it, right? It would take more than 3 of me to encircle this with our arms, right? Which means it's somewhere, it's somewhere around 20 feet in circumference. Big old tree, powerful, beat up. That tree is a survivor. It's endlessly interesting, right? You look at that tree and you just imagine what it's been through. And it's still going strong. That tree could live another couple of 100 years. It won't look like that after that time. It'll be less than what we see right there, but if it's let to live, not cut down, it has the capacity to live that long. Tops coming out of trees is nothing unusual. The wind does that on a frequent basis. So this is in the mountains. So is this. It's not something that only happens to deciduous trees. This is the red spruce up the parkway a ways towards Mitchell. And of note to bonsai people, this is how we often shape needle evergreens, because you can't just cut them back and hope that some new sprout will come out and head upwards like it does on the deciduous tree. You have to take a branch and force it upright and hold it with wire or some kind of device until it sets that way. But here, this tree, it took an existing part and over time it grew itself a new top, put itself back together. This poor little thing came out and cracked between the rocks. What happened to it? I don't know. Maybe somebody stepped on it. Maybe big ice storm or snow load broke it down. This is a small thing. Bonsai people crave these, they lust for these. They want to collect them and put them in pots. This is at a state park. I'm glad that it's protected because, maybe somebody would have dug it up before I got there. I would never have seen it. These kind of things I feel are best left where they are. But that's a very contentious point in bonsai circles. This is in a park in Tennessee. That one's broken down too, right? And it's suffered other abuse. See the names carved in it? This is right next to a pool. And my theory is that kids probably climbed this tree and rode it down into the pool. And enough did it and it broke down and it stayed that way. But it's still alive. It's just shaped by its environment, shaped by something that happened to it. Same with this. You might have noted I listed collateral damage as one of the ways that trees get shaped. I think that's how this happened. You'll notice that each of those branches is chopped off at about the same place. And I don't think it was pruned because of where it was. I don't believe it was pruned. It could have been. But I think a more likely thing was that a big tree fell and, broke those branches. That's why they're all broken about the same place, running out their length. And if you look over them, those branches that you see above them, in the upper right, they're shaped the same way. They're truncated the same way. Nothing about this tree gave me the impression that it had been pruned. This was something that happened, not human related. And, here it is in the act. I'm so glad I have this picture. If you look, you can see right here, a tree still there that fell on this other tree and took its top and bent it way the heck over. Right? This tree was probably more or less upright like these others were, but it's not going to be upright anymore. It's going to have this big kink in it because this tree is still there and it didn't fall yesterday. It's going to take years for that to either shift out of the way or rot away. And by that time, this tree will have more or less assumed that shape. It may right itself a little bit when the pressure is taken off, but it won't ever go back to being straight. It's been shaped by something that happened to it. Just like this one, this is a China berry in South Carolina. First thing that happened to it, it grew up in eastern South Carolina. And that's a big cotton field behind it. There's a poor section of the country there. And I'll bet that tree has felt the wrath of the chainsaw once or twice, but it's hanging in there, you know, and look at the shape of it. Whatever else you might think, it is interesting. It's absolutely worth looking at because of the story it's telling, by the shape, by the form of it. As with this one, and I have no idea what happened to this. This is at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, right? That's a historic village behind there. And there were lots of red cedars there, and they were old, but they didn't look like this one. What happened to this tree? We can only guess. Maybe it got hit by lightning. Maybe it got hit by a cannonball. No saying how old it is, how long it's been sitting there, but something happened to it, right? And there it is, completely unique. It has its own shape, its own character, its own identity, because what happened to it? These trees. These are old too. These were in existence at the time of the Civil War. That's the Chatham House behind me. And in this window right here, during the war, the Union soldiers occupied this house and they converted this wing of it into a hospital. And in this room, they did operations. And the operations that were most frequent in the Civil War were amputations. And Walt Whitman's brother fought in the Battle of Fredericksburg, which is where this is. And he was in the hospital, didn't have to get amputated, but his brother Walt came to see him. And Walt began being a nurse to help, right? He wanted to help his brother and the other soldiers who were hurt. And Walt Whitman wrote an account of how outside this window, there was a pile of severed limbs, arms and legs. The surgeons would cut them off in that room and then toss them out the window right in front of these two trees. Walt wrote about the two trees. So there's history for you. Well, what happened to these trees to make them look that way? I'll tell you what, they lived for a long time. They look that way because they're old and lots of stuff has happened to them. And that's the thing, you know, the older you are, whether you're a tree or a human being, the more time you've had to have things happen to you, things that leave a mark, as they say. But again, this is true of trees and people. Diversity is nothing new and it's nothing rare. It's part of life. And trees have adapted to be able to survive much adversity and carry on, right? When you see movement in a trunk, branch, even twigs, it's not always true in twigs, but it can be true. It's always true in trunks and branches. It's a manifestation of the process of damage and recovery. Something happens and the tree carries on. The tree recovers, right? So when you see a tree like this is an old sycamore tree, and you look at these branches, they're not straight. Like there's a little straight section right there, but you look at all the bends and twists and turns in them. How did it happen? Well, it happened just like that. See right there? That's a limb has been broken off. Here's a limb that has died, and here's a limb that's alive, coming from the same point as the one that died originally. And everywhere you see that limb move, something happened. Maybe it was something dramatic, right? Like a branch being torn off in a storm. And maybe it was something not so dramatic, like being girdled by an insect, right? chewed off by a squirrel when it was a young, tender twig? We don't know, but we can tell things happen to this tree by the shape of it. We can tell things happen to this tree. I think I know what, too. I can't know for sure because I wasn't there, but I believe that tree was hit by lightning. When you see that kind of barber pole dead zone going down a trunk, that's a typical pattern when lightning strikes a tree. The charge goes down the length of the tree and into the ground, and it often spirals just like that. That tree is hollow, completely hollow. It's a water oak. Here's a red maple. And if you look at this tree, the way I read it, at one point, it lost every single limb it had. It was nothing but a trunk. Look how young all those limbs are compared to the size of the trunk. The only way the trunk got that big was by growing bigger limbs, but they're gone. The limbs it has are all replacement limbs. I don't know who tied this tree in a knot, but there it is. Tough to figure out how some of these things happen. Holes straight through trees are not that uncommon. This one was up at Craggy, and it's mostly gone now. The young part, this part here, is still alive. So the tree is still alive, right? Because it's coming out of the base of this tree. But this part finally wasted away. Or maybe some passing person kicked it or something, who knows? But you're looking at something that doesn't exist anymore. Here's a chestnut oak, right? Not as dramatic as some of the others we've looked at, but check out all the other trees growing around it. What do you see? They're all straight, right? Relatively straight. What happened to this one? Something. You can't know, but something happened. It hasn't been straight in a long time. And this one, my friend Charlie told me about this tree. It's not too far away from his house, up on the Shut-In Trail. Maybe some of you have seen it if you've been up on the Shut-In Trail, just north of Sheep Pen Gap. Charlie said, "Oh, there's a tree up there you gotta see," and he said his wife Kim describes it as the crazy chicken dance tree. And I knew it the minute I saw it. I said, "That's got to be the crazy chicken dance tree." And sure enough, it is. Amazing shapes, right? This one, something happened to this branch right here. There's no doubt about that. Right there. And all these parts grew new and carried on. This is right on the Arboretum property. You don't have to go anywhere to see this stuff. It's all around you. If you look at trees, you'll see this phenomenon everywhere because it's a common feature of any tree that's got any age on it whatsoever. Longleaf pine, you know how they grow. They like to grow very straight. This one was no doubt off on the same path, but something happened to it. Here we can see some of the damage still existing. Here's a limb that broke off, and here's a new one growing to replace it. Got its head torn off, still alive. Matter of opinion. There's no right or wrong. It's not like the one on the left is right and the one on the right is wrong. In some people's eyes, that might be so. But to my eyes, the one on the right is correct because it's true to life, which was the intention. Make a tree look like a tree. Like any old tree? No, like a tree growing in the mountains of Western North Carolina that's had to struggle to stay alive. Like this tree. Right? This is a yellow birch on the way up to Mount Pisgah. The trail goes right past. If you've ever hiked up to Mount Pisgah, you've walked by this tree, hopefully you've noticed. They bear similarity. It wasn't until after the fact that I saw this tree and thought, you know, that looks a lot like that Korean hornbeam. I said, it's not a Korean hornbeam, right? I told you it's birch, but it has the same feeling. And that's what we're after. We're after the feeling. Next case study, red maple. Next month, the program is about red maple for bonsai. So I thought I shouldn't show this, but we have lots of red maples. So I want to show this one for a particular reason. All right. So here's a red maple produced here at the Arboretum. This was not a conversion. This was built here to be naturalistic right from the get-go. How was that done? Well, this was the start. 2010, it's growing in the ground. Look at all those parts growing out of it. It had been in the ground for about 5 years at this point. Grow for a year, get whacked back. Grow for a year, get whacked back. And because the root system wasn't disturbed, the regrowth was explosive. And then it gets whacked back again. But this time it gets dug up, right? And then it goes into a nice bath, relax. And then it gets potted up. The bath is to wash off as much of the field soil as we can. And then it goes into bonsai medium, which drains better, right? Look at that. Isn't that a thing of beauty? Well, it depends how you look at it. This was the following year, get some work done on it. Oh, please take note. I used cut paste. This is official cut paste from an official source. The tube comes with characters on it that I can't read, and it's supposed to help the tree cover its wounds. The following year, right? Step by step, step by step. The next year, whoa, what's the deal with this thing here? I'll tell you what, it started out that I was letting it grow, one, so it would fatten up, but also in hopes that it would help this scar cover over, right? By pulling a lot of energy this way, I was hoping it would have a peripheral effect on that scar and help it cover over. But then I started looking at that branch a different way. How? Well, this tree had something to do with it. This is an American elm, Haverford College in Pennsylvania. And look at that. That's an old tree. It's over 100 years old. And look at those limbs down in the ground. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because nobody's ever cut them off, right? Lots of trees will do this, but people cut them off because the limbs get in the way, makes it hard to mow. Maybe you want to park your pickup truck underneath the tree for the shade, right? You can have limbs hanging down like that. But this is what many deciduous trees are inclined to do if they can. Another look. And I like that. I looked at it and thought, wow, that's worth imitating, right? Let's put that in a bonsai. And so that was a conscious thing where I saw that tree and said, yeah, let's do that in a bonsai. And this tree already had a head start. So I started pulling it down, 2014. And here we take a tour around it so you can see it from the different angles. And look at the top. Yeah, look at all those wounds, right? They're not really covering very well. They're starting to, but they're not doing so great with the coverage. A couple of years later, 3 years, I think, it's starting to fill out. But still, look, the wound is pretty open. And these down here that had the cut paste on them, nothing. I mean, there's a little bit, but not much. Oh, what happened? What happened? There was nothing wrong with that limb that came off, or that whole side of the tree that came off. There was nothing wrong with that. It got taken off because I wanted that look. Why did I want that look? Well, because I kept seeing it. When I was walking in the forest, I kept seeing trees that had that look, and I liked it. I looked at that and I thought, that's pretty interesting. Holes are very interesting. They draw your attention. You always want to know what's inside the hole. Sometimes you stick your hand into one and it's bad. But holes are fascinating. We're attracted to them. And so I wanted the tree to have that effect. And then I went and did it down here too. I thought, well, heck, if that's not going to cover, go ahead and open it up. And so now this is in effect hollow. Here's a close-up. See this? This was a sprout. It's being shaped. It's kind of an experiment. This one is being shaped with wire. This one's being shaped as grow it, cut it, grow it, cut it, grow it, cut it. And there you see it again now as it looks. The last case study, debutante, American elm. There it is. Oh, I can't tell you how good I feel when I see this tree. I know it isn't the kind of tree that provokes good feeling necessarily, but it's got so much character. Oh my gosh, I'd love to run into this tree out in the forest. It would be highly memorable, wouldn't it? And it's got personality. You know, it kind of looks like a cheerleader, right? It's got its arms raised, put little pom-poms up there maybe, shouting out some cheer to encourage the team. You can make up a lot of things about it. I mean, if you have a mind that way, you can see it as something foreboding, evil. You know, like this would be outside of a haunted house. But I just think of it as a tree that's been through a lot, right? A lot of diversity, a lot of adversity, and the tree has kept fighting back. The tree's a survivor. This tree has been in development for a long time, and this pot is a brand new pot from Eli Aikens, and bought it specifically for this tree. It's a big tree and a big pot, and this tree will be out on display in the garden for the first time this spring. That's why it's a debutante. It's going to make its debut in the garden this spring. This is how it started. Air layers on the American elm, and then it went in the ground. And it looked like this for a while. And, you know, I did the same thing, grow, cut, grow, cut, grow, cut. But elms really grow strongly. So it didn't take very long for it to build up a trunk. And it built up big branches too. So when I cut the branches, there were big wounds. And it all proved to be a bit much for the tree. And so it had dieback, right? It died back from where some of those big limbs were whacked off. And then because the roots were really big too, some of those suffered dieback as well. But the tree didn't die. That's the main thing. It suffered a lot of adversity, but it didn't die. It kept living. And that means it's still in the game. And that means as the grower, I still have the opportunity to make something out of it. Here it is, growing again. And you can tell now, you can't see the damage now because it's all hidden behind all those healthy leaves. That's a healthy tree, in spite of all the damage, because it's compartmentalized those wounds. It's stable. It carries on. 2018. What happened? 2019, big year in the life of this tree. A big conversion. It went from being a trainer to having a bonsai identity. I didn't take a picture of it. That was stupid, wasn't it? Well, not really. Because I had my friend, Ben Kirkland, who operates a YouTube channel called Appalachian Bonsai. Ben came and spent a whole day with me videotaping work that I did on that tree. A whole day's work. It was massive, right? The work was massive and his videography was massive. I don't know how many hours he went back with. And that all translates to a major editing job. Well, it's not done yet. I hope that it will see the light of day soon, because now the tree is ready. The tree will be on display, and I'd like people to see how it was made. I think it was a good session, and I know that Ben is a good videographer, and I expect that that video, when it does appear, if it happens within my lifetime, I know it'll be good. So, Ben, please, for the love of God, finish that video and post it. Thanks, buddy. 2021, debutante. We're finishing up, folks. And looking through all those images, I found this. I took this picture from a drawing that was on display at the National Gallery. And then, you know, I have lots of these things. But I came across it the other day when I was putting this program together. And then the next thing you know, I came across this picture. And I thought, wow, that drawing on the left, that was made in the 1600s. Made in the 1600s, right? And like 400 years later, there's a tree that looks very similar. I know they're not the same, but very similar, because the forms of trees haven't changed lately, and the things affecting them haven't changed lately. And artists haven't changed lately. Well, not in terms of what inspires them. This is a detail. I don't even remember what the painting was. I think the painting was from like the 1700s. But this was a scene, right? You see some cows in the background. There was a farm, and all the works. It's a Western painting, so it had everything in it. And it had this tree, and I took a picture just of this tree because I thought, hey, that looks like the trees I see up in the mountains around here. These things appeal to us. There's a reason for that. They tell us a story. It's a story of struggle of life, of adversity, and overcoming adversity. The trees in the mountains around here, many of them have this look, tell that story. I want to emulate them because the story is a universal one, right? Adversity, the struggle to overcome it, carry on. But also, the trees that I'm seeing, where are they? They're in the Southern Appalachians. Where do I work? I work at the North Carolina Arboretum. What's the North Carolina Arboretum about? It's about this place in the world, this place called Southern Appalachia, Western North Carolina. I want to represent our trees as they struggle and live up on the mountains all around us. I hope you walk out there and see them. They're waiting for you. They've been there a long time. They'll probably be there after we're gone. So don't miss it. And if you can't make it up there, come to the Arboretum and see our bonsai collection, because you'll see this same sort of thing on display in the garden from the second weekend of May until the end of November.
Foreign art in our own place, updating its ancient image to the present day. Subscribe to the Curator's Journal, a year-long online course offering the ultimate insider's view of bonsai at the North Carolina Arboretum by curator Arthur Jura.